Hello, everybody. It's time to read the Odyssey. I realize we only have 4 days left of the school year. Today, next Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And then we're done. I would like to read as much of the Odyssey to you as I possibly can. And I want to do that for a couple reasons. One, I'm kind of selfish and I want to read a classic, a piece of classic literature to you guys. Okay? These are works that have spawned centuries of writing. Okay? It's just important stuff. And two, we talked about allusions this year for reading class at one point. Allusions, not illusions like a magician does, but allusions. A reference to a popular text, piece of pop culture, something like that. This is alluded to countless times in countless literature. To know the Trojan horse is to know, a reference to the Iliad. We're going to read about the Odyssey, and it's the story of Odysseus, one of the Greek princes. We heard his name a lot in the Iliad, and his adventure home, and it is top-notch stuff. I kind of like it better than the Iliad, only because it's a little more centered on some of the Greek myths and some of the adventures, but it's good stuff. So I'm going to try and read as much of it as I can. I'm going to probably read 3 books a day, and we'll see. All right, so let's start now with Book 1. For a long time, the Greek princes had besieged the formidable walls of Troy in Asia Minor. They had fought to avenge the honor of Menelaus, the king of Sparta, and the honor of Greece. Menelaus' wife, the beautiful Helen, had been persuaded by the Trojan prince Paris to leave Sparta to live with him in Troy. Their siege lasted 10 years until the Greeks finally won. They did not win through strength, however, but only through the shrewdness of one man, Odysseus, king of Ithaca. The story of the Trojan War is told in the Iliad. Leaving the city sacked and burnt, the Greek princes boarded their ships and sailed back to their homeland. Some arrived safely and resumed their thrones, but were betrayed and killed by envious rivals of their crowns. Others, instead of returning home, looked for new countries and distant lands. But 10 years after the war, each one of the kings had been accounted for, except one, Odysseus. Yet he had left with all the others, but one by one the sails of his ships had disappeared over the horizon, and nobody had seen them again. His people on the rocky island of Ithaca had been waiting for him, but in vain. 1, 2, 3 years had gone by, nothing. More years and still nothing. Was it possible to hope and wait any longer? Or was it wiser to bow one's head to the will of the gods and accept that Odysseus was dead? No, Odysseus was not dead. Living through 1,000 adventures, he still yearned for home, although in his heart the hope of seeing Ithaca again grew fainter and fainter. Where was he? Who was he with? Who kept him away? No man knew. The gods knew, however, because the fate of men lies in the hands of Zeus, king of all gods. On Olympus, the home of the gods, Odysseus' protectress Athena pleaded with her father Zeus. "Ah, father," she moaned, "my heart grieves for Odysseus' fate. He is being held prisoner on a small island in the western sea by the nymph Calypso, daughter of Atlas, who knows the sea in all its depths, and carries on his shoulders the columns that support heaven and earth." "The young girl is in love with Odysseus," Zeus replied. "She keeps him a prisoner, yes, but without violence." "But her sweet words, my father, and her tenderness are like chains to Odysseus. He is not happy on Calypso's island, and such is his longing for his rocky Ithaca that he wishes to die. Father, all the kings of Greece are now back in their kingdoms. Why, after 10 years, won't you allow Odysseus to return too?" "My daughter, I am not the one preventing his return. It is Poseidon, lord of the seas, who hates Odysseus because he blinded his favorite son, the Cyclops Polyphemus. It is time, though, that Poseidon gave up his persecution. Ithaca needs a king." "Father, may your will prevail," the blue-eyed Athena said. "Odysseus is on the island of Ogygia. Send your messenger Hermes to order Calypso to set him free." "Ogygia is very far away from Ithaca," observed Zeus, "and Odysseus has no ship. How will he be able to return home?" "A raft will do. No one knows the seas as well as Odysseus." After glancing towards the other gods, who nodded in silence, Zeus said, "Agreed! I shall send Hermes to the island of Ogygia," or Ogygia? A smile lit up on Athena's beautiful face. "And I shall myself go to Ithaca," she said, "to Telemachus, son of Odysseus, because there are things happening in Ithaca which fill my heart with anger." "What is happening in Ithaca, my sister?" asked Ares, the god of war. "Before leaving for the Trojan War, Odysseus married a very beautiful and wise woman called Penelope. She gave him a son before he left his kingdom. This son, Telemachus, is now 20 years old. Well, seeing that Odysseus did not return, some 40 young men, all of noble descent, came forward to ask Penelope's hand in marriage. Whoever marries Penelope shall also acquire the kingdom of Ithaca and all of Odysseus' wealth. I see nothing strange in that, replied Ares. Quite! It is natural for a woman as beautiful, wise, and rich as she is to be courted, but the young men who are called the suitors are behaving in a most unworthy manner. They play the lords and masters in Odysseus' house. And what does Telemachus say? Why doesn't he react? He is only a youth who has never been taught to fight. What could he do against 40 men? What about Odysseus' father, Laertes? As Telemachus is too young, so Laertes is too old. He left the palace many years ago, and now lives in a peasant's hut in the country. But the people of Ithaca, why don't they rebel? Because they have lost all hope of seeing their king Odysseus return. And how does Penelope manage to keep the suitors at bay? Zeus asked. Athena smiled. For some years she has used a trick to elude their request. She started to weave a shroud for Laertes. When he dies, she said, I should like my husband's father to be covered by a worthy shroud. When I have finished weaving it, I shall choose from amongst you my new husband. The goddess Hera observed. It doesn't take years to weave a shroud. Of course not, Athena replied, but Penelope has been doing at night what she was weaving during the day, and so has been able to make her work last. Alas! The suitors have discovered her trick, and she must now give them her answer. That is why it is necessary to act quickly and allow Odysseus to return to Ithaca. Zeus agreed and said, Do whatever you must, my daughter. Book 2. Meanwhile, in the palace of rocky Ithaca, the suitors had been making merry as usual. They ate, they drank, they talked about Penelope's beauty, they mocked Odysseus, whom they thought was, by now, dead. They laughed at Telemachus, they forced old Phemius, Odysseus' minstrel, to play the lyre and sing for them. They were listening to a ballad when the servants announced to Telemachus that a stranger had arrived. Hospitality was a sacred duty for the Greeks, and the young prince therefore hastened to the visitor, who was tall, strong, and of noble appearance. Welcome, friend, said Telemachus, to what was once Odysseus' house. Who are you? Where do you come from? My name is Mentes, and I am the son of the Taphian king, answered the stranger. I have come to Ithaca because I used to know Odysseus well, and I expected to find him here. Lowering his head, Telemachus replied, He is not here. He has not returned from Troy. Perhaps his bones are lying on some remote shore or in the depths of the sea. Perhaps, Mentes answered, and pointing to the suitors, he added, And who are they? They are the suitors, vile and insolent people who live off my father's possessions and squander his wealth. They say they want to marry my mother, and in the meantime behave as her masters. And you? To this question Telemachus did not know what to answer, and looked down. So with a smile, Mentes said, It is up to you to act, Telemachus. You must go in search of news about your father. Perhaps he is not dead as the suitors believe. Perhaps he shall return, and if he does, that day will be a day of bloodshed. Go, my young friend, find out a ship and go first to Nestor, the wisest of all Greeks. Then go to Menelaus, king of Sparta. I am sure they will both be able to help you. I thank you, Mentes. I will do as you tell me. Come now, rest and eat with me. But Mentes, who was Athena in disguise, shook his head and said, I'm sorry, I can't. I must be on my way. And with those words he vanished, leaving Telemachus full of wonder and fear, but also of hope. Old Alathene, who knew the art of interpreting the flight of birds and could foretell the future, came to him. He had noticed that the mysterious guest had vanished, as if by magic, and he asked, Who was that man, Telemachus? I don't know, answered the troubled youth, but he gave me good advice. He said that my father might still be alive. There! He exclaimed, suddenly raising his hand. Look there! All looked up to the sky. 2 great eagles had appeared. Flapping their mighty wings, they descended almost to the ground, and after tearing at each other's necks with their talons, they rose into the sky and disappeared. Impressed, the suitors remained silent. Wise old Alathene whispered, This means Odysseus will come, and he shall do justice. While the suitors resumed their feasting, Telemachus spent the rest of the day pondering over Mentes' words. He said his name was Mentes, he thought, but I don't believe it. No, he was a god, and he came to bring me a message. He wanted me to know that my father is not dead. And what have I ever done for him? Nothing. I have remained here thinking I was protecting my mother. But how can I protect her against 40 men? It is time for me to leave. That god, whoever he was, advised me first to go to Nestor and then to Menelaus. I shall do just that. I shall surely find out something about my father. However, not one ship was left to Telemachus, since the whole royal fleet had left with Odysseus to go to war. But he had many friends, and most of all he had Athena's help. It was she who found a ship and whispered in the ears of some of the young men of Ithaca, Go to the seashore. You will find a ship. Board it and prepare to sail with Telemachus. One by one the youths obeyed, and at dusk they found themselves aboard the beautiful ship. Athena took on the appearance of Mentor, an old prophet and friend of Odysseus, and going back to the palace said to Telemachus, "What are you still doing here? Your companions are waiting for you. Run to the ship." "To the ship?" asked the bewildered youth. "Yes. Do not linger. Do not waste time telling your mother. Go at once, but beware of the suitors. They must not know of your departure." "But my mother," whispered Telemachus. Mentor shook his head. "No, there is no time. Go at once and be quick." Soon after, the youth ran to the beach where his companions were waiting for him, though not knowing why. He said to them, "Let's go, my friends. We have a mission to accomplish, and we shall do it." As the moon rose in the sky, the ship sailed from the island. Soon a light breeze began to blow. Telemachus, who sat at the stern by the rudder, asked Mentor, who was in fact Athena, "Where shall we go now?" "To Pylos, where Nestor lives." "My life depends on this voyage. I can feel it. It is necessary that I find out something about my father. But what will Nestor be able to tell me? Perhaps nothing, but he will certainly be able to give you some good advice. Nestor was the wisest amongst all the Greeks who fought under the walls of Troy. Do not forget it." "This stranger who said he was called Mentes," continued Telemachus, "I think he was a god." "Well, he also advised me to go to Menelaus," Mentor replied. "And so you will. It is the first time you have left Ithaca, the first time you have been to the sea and traveled to distant lands. But do not be afraid. I am sure that somebody amongst the gods is assisting you and staying by your side." Telemachus could not have imagined that at the very moment it was a goddess who was speaking to him. With a good wind filling her sails, the ship voyaged forth on the great sea in which the stars were reflected. That's the end of book 2. Now let's go to read book 3. The next day, a column of smoke appeared in the far distance. The ship was approaching Pylos, and on the beach a group of people could be seen. Among them, a tall old man with white hair stood out. Pointing to him, Mentor exclaimed, "That is Nestor, Telemachus." Indeed, there on the beach, in front of an altar from which smoke was rising, was wise Nestor, who had just performed a sacrifice. Mentor and Telemachus presented themselves to him, and he greeted the young men with emotion and affection. "Welcome, son of Odysseus. You remind me of times long past when there was no sadness. Grief and tragedy were not brought by war, my son, but on our homeward journey. Many of our companions never saw their homes again, and some, upon arriving, found death instead of peace. You have come to ask me news of your father?" "Yes. I must find out something about him. My mother is to give her answer to the suitors who want to marry her, and who are squandering our wealth and blackening our honor." "Unfortunately, I know nothing of Odysseus. Go to Menelaus," replied old Nestor, "and ask for his advice. But before you do, you must spend the night in my palace, because I see from your face that you are weary. And let it not be said," he concluded, moving away, "that when Odysseus' son came to me, I did not greet him like my own son." Soon afterwards, Mentor and Telemachus were welcomed into the stately marble palace. Nestor's loveliest and youngest daughter, Polycaste, bathed the prince, rubbed him in perfumed oil, and helped him to dress. This was an honor bestowed on guests. Later, a great banquet was laid out. Sipping wine from his golden cup, Nestor declared, "Yes, Telemachus, it was your father who enabled us to conquer Troy. After 10 years of siege and battles, we were still there under the walls, and a great many of our best warriors had fallen. Achilles, the strongest of them all, the one who was by his mere presence put the Trojans to flight, was dead. He was shot," the old man went on with a sigh, "by an arrow from Paris's bow. How could we hope to enter the city after his death? It was then that your father had a wonderful idea. He had a big wooden horse built, so large that our strongest warriors, fully dressed for battle, could hide in the hollow of its belly. Then we took down our tents, dismantled our entire camp, loaded our ships, and made believe that we were sailing home. Upon awakening the following morning, the Trojans found that there were no more Greeks, but only a gigantic horse on the beach." "I have heard about it," said Telemachus thoughtfully. "Your father had foreseen everything. The Trojans dragged the horse inside the walls of the city, and so without a single sword blow we entered the city that for 10 very long years we had tried in vain to conquer. Odysseus ordered us to wait inside the horse until dark, and when all became silent, the Trojans had gone to sleep feeling so safe that they had not even placed sentries on the walls. Your father gave the order, and the warriors stealthily came out of the horse's belly. Meanwhile, under the cover of darkness, our ships turned back. Troy's gates were opened by the warriors from the wooden horse, and our army invaded the city. What happened then, everybody knows. Massacre. The Trojans tried to resist, but they were overwhelmed. The city was conquered and set on fire, and Helen, the beautiful Helen, for whom we had fought, was finally returned to her husband Menelaus. Telemachus, added Nestor, tomorrow you shall go to Menelaus himself in Sparta, and you will ask his advice. I will give you a chariot and my best horse so that you will get there quickly. May it be the gods' will that Odysseus is still alive and able to return to his dear Ithaca. I hope so, Nestor, said Telemachus, mostly for my mother, who, though she loves my father so, will be forced to marry another man if he does not return. A solemn silence greeted these words. Later, as Telemachus lay in his bed, he could not get to sleep. He wondered what would happen in the morning and what advice he would be given by Menelaus. The next day, in a chariot drawn by 2 splendid white horses, Telemachus and Mentor left Pylos for Sparta, the city famous for its valiant warriors and its beautiful queen. The journey through the Rocky Mountains crested with olive trees was very pleasant, but Telemachus' heart was heavy with doubt and fear for his father's fate. He hardly dared hope that Odysseus was not dead, that someone was holding him captive in a faraway land, and that soon he would be able to return. "What are you thinking about, Telemachus?" asked Mentor suddenly. "I am thinking that I am 20, that I have heard much about my father's exploits, and that I don't even know him. My friend, I wouldn't recognize him if I saw him now on the road. Isn't that sad?" They reached Sparta as a feast was being held in Menelaus' magnificent palace. The king was sitting at his table with his friends. The acrobats delighted them with their acts, and a bard played the lyre whilst telling ballads of glorious adventures. When he heard that 2 strangers of noble countenance had arrived in a carriage drawn by 2 strapping horses, Menelaus ordered his servants to prepare fragrant baths, clean purple tunics, and white cloaks for them. It seemed to Telemachus that he was in a fairy tale world, as he was washed, oiled, and dressed by the loveliest maid servants. It seemed that he walked in a dream as he crossed the room and corridors of the palace. He had never seen a place so rich, so resplendent in gold, marble, and ivory. There you go, guys. End of the first 3 books of the Odyssey. Like I said, the story of Odysseus. Is he going to come back? Is he going to make it back? What happens? You'll find out.